All right, hello and welcome everyone to this month's Portals community call. Our last Portals community call of 2024, it appears, and I'll let Nick talk more about the timing for the next one. But I'm Jason Gumpert from MS Dynamics World. As always, glad to be able to bring this event to you. As we begin here, just a couple of notes. First, we do welcome your questions. Look for the questions block in the webcast interface. Nick will be keeping an eye on that as we go today. So really enter those questions anytime. We're also recording today's event. We'll be sharing that with all of you after the session ends. So with that, Nick, I'm going to hand things over to you.
Alrighty, thank you, Jason. Welcome all. This month we're going to be talking about web templates, which are a very powerful feature. Been in there a long time, so yeah, if you haven't played with web templates yet, hopefully this will give you some ideas and get you moving on one of the more powerful features of Power Pages. So before we get into things, I'll do a quick introduction in case this is your first time joining us. My name is Nicholas Hayduk. I am the president and a software engineer with Engineered Code Consulting Inc., based here in Regina, Saskatchewan. Engineered Code's a Microsoft partner. We help clients and other partners all over the world with Power Pages implementations. We've also got EC Learn, which is our learning management system built for the Power Platform. I personally have been working with Power Pages for about, I guess, 15 years now. My career began at ADX Studio, which was the company that originally built the Power Pages product and was acquired by Microsoft in 2015. If you're not already connected with me on LinkedIn, please feel free to reach out. Otherwise, if you're interested in other Power Pages content, you can follow us on Twitter. You can check out our blog. We've got a YouTube channel where we do, in addition to these recordings, we post a weekly Power Pages tip. We've also got our the Refresh the Cache podcast on the crm.audio network. That there's a new episode coming up here very shortly. So yeah, those are all the ways that you can keep in touch. And please feel free to connect or follow any of those channels. All right. As always, I guess we're on our what is this? Our 5-year anniversary. Started this in January of 2020. So with the great support of Jason and his team at MS Dynamics World. So it's been a great 5 years, and we're looking to do many more of these. So just want to again say thanks to the MS Dynamics World team for all their support over this kind of half decade. I don't know if either of us thought it would go on this long, but it's been a great collaboration. So I appreciate all that they do. Agenda. So as always, we will talk about our portals news. There's a little bit this month, as well as then move on to today's topic, which I mentioned was web templates, and then we'll talk about the date and time of our next community call, which, as Jason mentioned, is going to be in January. We've traditionally taken December off because late in December people have better things to do than listen to me talk about Power Pages. And then we'll also leave some time for Q&A if anyone has any questions. Yeah, feel free to post those at any time in the questions block, whether they're related to the topic I'm speaking about or anything else, kind of Power Pages or Power Platform related. Feel free to drop your questions in. Okay, so why don't we get into the news? So, okay, so let's start off with just kind of our regular segment here, which is just looking at what Microsoft has published on the Power Pages product team blog. So these are essentially the new features that have been released in the last month or so. So the first one here is static web pages. So you have the ability to go in and say, hey, I want to make these particular pages available via like kind of a static CDN. So Microsoft introduced the CDN capabilities. I don't know, it's probably been over a year, maybe 2 years now. But I think for a while they were just like before this, they were just for things like images or JavaScript files, that sort of thing. Now you have the ability to configure which if you have specific pages that you want to be delivered as static assets, and that just means that they go out into the content delivery network, and that means they're going to load much faster. They're not going to hit the server. The users aren't going to hit the server with those requests. They're going to be dealt with by the CDN. Now, of course, that only kind of makes sense for anonymous users and for pages that aren't changing a whole lot. So you have to be kind of careful as to which pages you choose to enable for the static functionality. But often there are kind of public pages that look the same to everyone, so there's no reason that they can't just be delivered as a static version via the content delivery network. So that's now something that you can give a try. Another one here is the data summarization API. So there has been, we've talked about in the past, some of the summarization features, having Power Pages kind of summarize, what's showing up in the list or in search. With this API, you can now kind of programmatically invoke the Power Pages web API, and you can say, I want to summarize, and you can kind of give it what you want it to summarize. So you can say, I want you to summarize, the example they use is here, I want you to summarize a case, and here are the fields I want you to consider when you're giving me that summary, and it will reply back with, here's the summary. So you can essentially invoke that data summarization capabilities via the Power Pages web API. The other one that they've announced is basically some updates to the Power Advisor, which is basically a section within the Power Platform Admin Center that provides advice on or suggestions on your various Power Platform products. So what they've added is some advice. Basically, if you're on the standard data model or you're on the Bootstrap version 3, it's going to start telling you, hey, you might want to migrate. There's some, here are the reasons that you might want to migrate to the newer versions of these things. The Power Advisor is also going to let you know if your SSL, I think, is within 90 days of expiring. And they've also added some inline actions to the Power Advisor. So right there, you can shut down the site or you can enable the web application firewall. So some enhancements to the Power Advisor functionality. And that's what's been kind of released here. A relatively busy month for features because of Ignite that's going on. So often we'll see kind of features come out of that. But let's talk about the other piece of news. I don't know if anyone's saw the news or have been reading any of the kind of on the tech side. But there's another Power Page, and I'm going to put quotes here. There's been another Power Pages hack. So I'm not sure if you remember, this was, when was this? This was probably 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. The first time that Power Pages made the news for being hacked. The funny thing is that this one is essentially the same thing, just a slightly different technology. So what happened the last time this Power Pages made the news was that people were turning on, there's kind of a legacy feature called the OData feed on lists. And so people were turning that on, but also not enabling or turning off table permissions. So when you did that, users could, or someone who was smart could look at the OData feed for these lists where there were no table permissions and can essentially see all the data that was tied to that list. Now, obviously, that's a problem. You did have to kind of do some things to make that happen. So you did have to check off, like the OData feed, you did have to turn that on in order for that exploit to be there. But so the big learning from that one was Microsoft changed it around so that you couldn't anymore disable table permissions for a list. You had to explicitly, so table permissions were always enforced, and so if you wanted anonymous users to access data, you had to go into the web roles and actually enable anonymous users to have the permissions to see the data. So even though you did have to click one button, the argument was that it was kind of too easy to do that. And it was easy for people to not realize what they were doing and to create that vulnerability. What's been kind of brought up this in this kind of exploit, and it's this App Omni group that I think found it to begin with. Um, Really, the vulnerability that they're referring to here is the fact that the web API exposes a bunch of records if you configure the web API to expose a bunch of records. So whereas before it was the OData feed, now it's the web API. Again, there isn't a bug if you configure it to allow anonymous people to access the web API. Well, then anonymous people can access the web API. So if you do see this, I wouldn't be, I wouldn't be panicking. I would, whenever we're asked to do security reviews, we always check to make sure that, what permissions do anonymous users have. When it comes to the web API, checking all of those permissions, making sure that you're not using the asterisks for your column definitions, so that you're very explicit about what data can be exposed. So again, would I consider this a leak? Um, I would say that the people who set these up created a leak, but again, I don't know if this is so much a problem with the product. We'll see kind of how Microsoft responds to this one. This isn't a case like the last time where there's kind of some defaults that kind of made it a little bit easier. In this case, like you would actually have to add the records or you'd have to add the anonymous web role to those table permissions to get it to work. Um, so I think this is more highlighting the fact that as much as we want to push these kind of low code solutions for people to try things out themselves, the real risk associated with that is that for people that don't come from a background of security, you may run into issues like this where they didn't realize what they were doing. I find Microsoft has lots of messaging on like, hey, you're exposing data anonymously. Um, so I don't know. I'm a little skeptical as to how big of an issue this is, whether this is like truly a problem with the product. Like I know it's not a technical problem, but at some point, like if you give people certain capabilities and they're going to misuse them, it's hard to put too much blame on the product, because like we don't want Microsoft to shut off our ability to do this because it's very helpful. But if you got people who don't know what they're doing, configuring this thing and exposing a bunch of data, to me that's more of a problem with the people than with the product. But that could just be my biased opinion. So yeah, you can see here I got a bunch of different links to different people who kind of picked up on the um, on kind of this thread. Again, it's always a good time to review your Power Pages site to make sure that you don't have anonymous permissions set up accidentally. We want to make that security as tight as it possibly can be. So for those of you with existing sites, I would just use this as an opportunity to do exactly that. Review what you had. Make sure that you wouldn't be one of the people whose data would be exposed. So just make sure that if you are using the anonymous web role, be very strict about what you're using it for. I think sometimes we see people using global permissions to kind of work around some of the security, like if they're not quite sure how to set up parent scope permissions properly, and they just kind of get away with using global permissions when they don't need to. Again, you need to make sure your security model is as tight as possible, and that's kind of the real lesson here, is that the Power Pages security model is different than anything else. It has its own model, so you need to make sure that you're familiar with and know how to use this model. Otherwise, you could be caught up in this millions of records that are being exposed. All right. And that kind of covers the news for this month. So why don't we get into today's topic, which is, as I mentioned, web templates. So what are web templates? They are essentially reusable blocks of content. Now that content could be HTML, could be JavaScript, could be CSS, could be Liquid. All of these kind of go into a block. You give that block a name, and then you can use that block kind of in a whole bunch of different places. So again, the idea here is that you create can be a combination of any of those, your HTML, JavaScript, CSS, Liquid. You put that into, you can think of it as like you put it into a file, you give that that record, you give that row a name. This is all created directly in Dataverse. You give it a name, and then you can use that block of content in a variety of different places. So where can we use web templates? Some of the big ones, the header and the footer. So if you've ever worked on the header or footer of your website within Power Pages, that's contained in web templates. So right on the website record itself, there will be two lookups to the web template table. One is for the header of your website, and one is for the footer of your website. So if you're looking at your web page on a Power Pages site, what you see in the header and what you see in the footer, those come from the web templates that are defined within your environment. And so to be clear, web templates are a table within Dataverse. If you're using the enhanced data model, it's a virtual table. But web template is its own table in Dataverse where this stuff is stored. It's not stored anywhere else. It's stored directly in Dataverse within the web template table. Another place that web templates are used are in page templates. So when you are creating a new web page, you need to select which web template you want to use in order to render out the content of your page. There are two types of web templates. One is the rewrite template, and that kind of points to some .aspx files that exist in the backend that you have no control over. The other option are a web template-based page template, and in that case, whatever you define in your web template is used to define the output of the page. So we also use web templates when it comes to creating our own page templates. You can also use web templates via Liquid. So that means if you're able to insert Liquid code in certain places, you can then use the include syntax. So the include tag within Liquid to then kind of bring in another, bring in that web template so that you can reuse that functionality. So that's the way that you can insert it. So for example, if you're working on a particular page, on a web page, and you're putting details into the copy section, one of the things you can do is and say you want that same bit of content on a bunch of different pages, rather than duplicating what you can do is you can just insert a Liquid include statement, and that brings in that web template from kind of the repository of the web templates. You can also use the extends and block tags in order to create a kind of hierarchy of page templates. We can look at that a little bit too as we kind of look through some of the web templates. They are using ads and polls. I'm not going to get into that too much because I don't think there's too many people out there using ads and polls, but they are used to help define the layouts for ads and polls. And then the last thing here, which is relatively new, is you can actually build your own components that are available in the Design Studio, and that's done by creating page templates as well. So those are all some of the different places where once you've created your page template, you can then use these these web templates in all these kind of various places. So in terms of actually creating page templates or editing page templates, where can you do that? So historically, the place we did that was in the Power Pages or the Portal Management app. So that's the model-driven app that we have access to when you install Power Pages into an environment. That is primarily where people are going to create them. If you're going to create a new web template from scratch, you're going to go into there to create it typically. Now, if you're just editing, there's a couple other options, and these other options are quite popular. So one of them is the Portal Code Editor for XRM Toolbox. So if you're a XRM Toolbox fan, as we are, if you use the Portal Code Editor tool, web templates will be one of the things that you're able to get in there and kind of start working with the code. And then what I think is probably the most popular way these days, at least it's the way that I'm doing it, is with VS Code. So whether you're using the desktop version of VS Code and then you're using the PAX CLI to download your Power Pages code, web templates will be one of the things that it downloads, or you're using the web version, VS Code for web, and editing kind of directly within your browser, you can do that. You can edit web templates via the VS Code as well. So let's get into just kind of showing you some of these things and how they work. So let me bring up my browser. Okay, So let's start off by just refreshing my portal management app here. So as I mentioned, within the portal management app, or if you're using the enhanced data model, it might say Power Pages Management app. Under content here, you'll see web templates. You'll see I've got 245 web templates. When you install Power Pages, it comes with a bunch of different page templates or web templates out of the box. I'm just going to filter on NHPAP. A filter on that one there. So you can see in my current site that I'm working on, I've got 50 of them. You can see they're used. So you can see we've got poll templates. I think we've got ad templates. We have some of these templates for like blank page, 100% blank page, various kind of different uses. You'll also notice that Microsoft sometimes uses page templates to implement functionality. So like faceted search, you can actually go in there and look at the actual code that's used to do that. We've got different page layouts, and you'll see that we've got some test ones in here as well. So when we talk about creating a new page template, we're literally just going into here, and I'm going to say, I'm going to call this PCC web template. Oh, NHPHP. Oop, didn't type that in right. NHPHP. Okay, so I'm going to say that. So I've created it by name, and then everything else I want to do goes into here. So I can create some HTML. I can create some JavaScript. I could create some CSS. All of that can go into here. So for now, I'm just going to do a simple p tag, and I'm going to put in portals community call. I'm going to save that. And now it's important that I remember the name of this thing. So PCC web template. Now, if I want to, I'm going to go over to my, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new one. So I'm going to say a new page, PCC web template. I'm going to click add. And now, if I want to include that web template on this page as a, if I just want to kind of add it to the page, I can go and edit the code. Edit the site. There we go, PCC web template. And now I'm just going to use the liquid include tag. And then I just got to use the name of the web template. So if I save this, go back here, sync, we'll see if that works. See that? There we go, portals community call. And if I were to preview that, if I were to right click, inspect that area, we got the portals community call. We got the script and style tags that I put in there. So I basically created this component that I can then, if I wanted to use this, I could reuse it in a bunch of different places. All I have to then do is type in, or sorry, put in there. Let me close that one. All I got to do is use this liquid include syntax to include it anywhere liquid is supported. Now, let's just quickly look at how the header and footer works. So if I were to look at the web page, running nice and slow today. Okay, so the website that I'm, there we go, load again. Yeah, you can see this message here. Your data is visible to anyone. NH. So if I go into here, we'll see that I got two templates. So we've got the header template and the footer template. So if I go back to my, maybe I'll just click here to make it save yourself some time. So within this web template, which again just has a name, website, and it's been linked up in that with that lookup, this is where we can that contains all the liquid and HTML, some JavaScript, all of that, which controls the header, and then of course the footer of your website. Now let's just take a quick look at page templates. That's another place where we mentioned that we can reuse or we can use uh, page templates. So I'm just going to open this one up just to show you what the rewrite ones look like. So if you select the type of rewrite, then what you have to do is you have to provide this URL, this path to an ASPX file. Now, unless you're Microsoft, you don't have the ability to add or edit any of these ASPX files. So the templates that are available to us using this method are kind of predefined. They already exist. We can't add our own or edit these ones. So any of the rewrite page templates are kind of locked down. We can use them, but we can't change them. Whereas if I pick a different one, I'll maybe use the default studio template, we can see that this one is a type of web template. And as soon as we do that, we have the option here to select which web template we want to use. So we can look at exactly what the default studio web template looks like. And if we want to, in theory, we could change it. So you can see that in this particular case, what we're doing is it's just some simple markup that includes the page copy. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, what's page copy? But we know if it's using the include syntax, that means we're pointing to another web template. So we can kind of follow the trail down here. So I'm going to look for one called page copy. So here are the page copies. So if I were to look at this one for our site, this is what it's going to display. So it's going to have that other div, that main div that we had. Then we have the page copy div, and then we're using the liquid editable tag to display the ADX_copy attribute of the current page. So that's how we, using web templates, can control basically the entire page, because we've got the header and the footer, which we control through web templates, and then what exists in between them is based on the page template, which again we can then use a web template to define. All right. So we've talked about the header and footer. We've talked about the page templates. Just going to flip back here. We've talked about the liquid include. Let's just quickly talk about the extends and block. See if I can find an example in here. So I'm looking for a web template that starts with the extends. So there's some, but let me find a better example. Full page. So if I look at full page, this one says it extends layout column 1. So what that means is that if we were to look at layout column 1, we would see that it defines in layout column 1 a block. It'll have a block of main. So let's find layout column 1, and just keep in mind that in here there was a block called main. So if we then look for that, so you can see that layout column 1 has all this in it, and then we have our different blocks. So this has a block called breadcrumbs, a block called title, and a block called main. So when you create a web template that extends this one, this means that it'll output this, but in our case, we happen to override the main block. So we've replaced, this one has a default implementation, which is just include the page copy. But in our case, for the other one, we're going to override what's in this main block. So all these other ones remain the same. So because we didn't override the breadcrumbs or the title, it will take this kind of default implementation. But because we overrode the main block, it will use whatever we specified in the main block in our particular web template. So that was full page, I believe, right? Full page. So again, this extends this one. And so this one will be directly related to the page template. Or maybe it's not being used. May not be used on this particular site, but it will be this one that's associated to the page template, not the other one, because this one extends. So this is kind of the main home, and then it basically this inherits from. So if you're familiar with kind of inheritance in programming, this is kind of the parent class that's inheriting from the layout one column. And so this lets you create. You can have multiple kind of layers of the inheritance. You can have one that inherits from another one, that inherits from another one, that inherits from another one. So you can create these different levels of inheritance and create some pretty sophisticated different layouts if you're using this kind of block and extends tags in Power Pages and using the liquid templates to do that. Okay. So again, we talked about how they can be edited in here. They can be edited in the Portal Code Editor, and they can also be edited in the VS Code Editor. So if you were to go into your Design Studio and click the Edit Code button, you'll get this interface, and you'll see that web templates appear here. Now, yeah, so PCC web template, this is the one I created. This is how I am commonly editing the web templates. But again, what you can't do is you can't create new templates in here. So that's why we pretty much always go in here to create the page templates or the web templates, and then we'll go in here to edit them once they already exist. Just checking, I don't see any questions yet. All right, so I will keep going. So we've talked about header and footer, page templates, including via liquid, using either the include or the extends. Now let's talk about the new feature that's come out here, and that is, so when I created this PCC web template and I added it to the page, what I had to do was I had to know the liquid include statement. I had to go add it to I had to add it into the markup using the VS Code editor. Wouldn't it be nice if there was a way that could allow, without kind of getting into the VS Code or getting into the HTML, to add these web templates to our page? The great news is that is what Microsoft has released recently, and so what we can do now is, if I hit the plus button here, I want to add a new section here. You can see that there's this custom components area. So if I click the Nick component, it's going to add that to the page. I can say edit the custom component. It's actually going to ask me here, what's the title and what's the count? Now, I just made a simple one that just outputs the title and the count. So it just simply outputs those parameters. And I'm going to say preview this. So we can see that my web templates output that. So then you're probably wondering, well, how do I define the title? How do I define the count? Like, where do I give it these parameters? So let me show you what that web template looks like. So didn't do anything, like it's not anything too magical. I'm just gonna look for Nick here. So all I did is I created a new template. And if I look at the actual components that I've created, what's special about these ones is this manifest. So by creating this manifest, by using the manifest tag at the beginning, or I think it can even go at the end of your component, you define how it looks in the user interface. And so what the Power Pages Design Studio looks for web templates that manifest to know which ones to show when you go to add one of those components. So for now, all the type is always functional, but you give it a display name, a description. You can define the tables. We'll talk about what that means here in a second. And then you define the parameters. So in my case, I had the title and the count. And I can just, description, display name, that sort of thing. And then in your actual template, when you're writing it out, any of these parameters, they're given to you just as variables within Liquid. So I can do all sorts of different crazy things in here if I wanted to. Let me show you an example that Microsoft has in their documentation for this. So you can see here that you can do a fetch XML query in your thing, and then you can use your parameters. In this case, they're using the count to limit how many of the things that we're going to query. So in this case, we're doing, I believe we're showing a bunch of posts. So in this case, we can control how many posts we want to show each time. We're also using, so which parameters do we have? We have number of columns, we have the count, we have the title. So those different, so the columns is being used here. We're probably using the title somewhere. Perhaps not the title, but then like the read more label will be in there. So there's the load more label. So all these different parameters you can then use throughout your web template. And we're just using the parameters that are defined in here. So I mentioned about the you can specify which table. So if I look at my component here, you can see that I've specified a table of contact. But you'll notice that I don't use that table anywhere in my web template, which is that's not going to break anything. What that controls is that when I go here and say edit data, I control which tables show up in here, because once I click this, it'll take me over to the data workspace so I can play with my data. So it's really just kind of like to give the users a quick way to see which tables are being used in this thing. Again, there's no enforcement of that. There's nothing forcing you to use the tables that you define there, but they want to give the users a way to know kind of what data are you using, and so you have to kind of explicitly list which column or which tables you have in this tables parameter in the manifest. So if you had kind of multiple in there, you'd see the different tables that would be listed there, and that just again gives you that link over to the data section in the data workspace in the Design Studio. So even once it's added, you can still go back in here. You can change all these different parameters. For the most part, I think like the parameters for now are strings. So, but you can add a bunch here if you want to. But you can see just based on this example, like you can do some pretty cool. There's lots of cool stuff you can do with Liquid. This is again, you're doing a loop here, so it's getting all the things with your fetch XML, doing a loop, displaying them in different ways. And this is all kind of configurable. Once you create this, then it's available in the Design Studio. So this is really about bridging the gap between needing someone on the pro code side, someone who wants to use this kind of more low code. This is how you can give this functionality. You can have a pro code person build this, hand it off to the low code people, and then they're just using the Design Studio here to add these components to the page. Again, historically, what we would have had to do, and if here, I'm going to just edit this code. I'll show you what inserting that liquid actually does. So you can see it just doesn't include, because that's all stupid interface. It doesn't include, so because all we're doing is we're including that component, and then it's just putting in the parameters. So title 5, count too many. I actually ran into a problem when I was setting this up earlier because I called the thing Nix component with an apostrophe, and that blew this up because it doesn't properly escape the single quote character. So be wary of that. But yeah, all this is doing is really inserting the liquid include statement, and then with the parameters that you've indicated in there. So there's not a whole lot of magic going on there. It's just an easier interface to, again, bridging bridging the two worlds of low code and no code into the kind of the pro code world. All right, I'm just gonna pause here just to see if there's any questions. Okay, so got a couple more slides over here. So we talked about that demo. So what are other use cases for web templates? So obviously we've talked about how they can be used for the header and footer of your website. They're used for the page templates. But what are some other things that we're often using web templates for? So it often comes up, I've got 4 or 5 people working on a Power Pages project. How do they work with each other without stomping all over each other? Because if 2 people have to work on the exact same page and they're working on the same section in that page, they're going to be overriding each other all the time. So if that situation ever comes up, one thing you can do is is break it out into have your users use different web templates. So each one of the developers has their own web template that then gets included onto the page. But that way you're not working on the same record anymore. You're working on your own individual web template, and what you do in yours, I don't want to say can't impact the other person, but you're not going to save over their work. You're going to have your kind of own kind of workspace. So using web templates to kind of divvy up work on the same page can be very helpful. Another place where you're using web templates a lot is if you're writing a JavaScript, essentially a JavaScript library for your Power Pages site. One of the ways that you can include it in various places is by using the include statement. So you can put all of your JavaScript in a web template, and then you just include that using the liquid include statement. Now, of course, you could also upload the JavaScript as a web file. You could upload it somewhere else in a CDN and then refer to it. So there's lots of different ways, but that is one way to use web templates is, put your code into a web template and then use the liquid include statement to include that code on the page. Another thing that we've used web templates for is some of the places have character limits. So if you look at the copy section of a web page, there is a character limit enforced there. Now, I think you might be able to increase it, but rather than kind of messing with the out-of-the-box tables, what we've done when we've had some clients that needed a really long page, well, first of all, try and figure out how to not have such a long page. That's number one. But if you do run into the situation where you need a lot of characters in a page, what you can do is break it up into the different web templates. So the page itself only have a bunch of includes of other web templates, and then you put in all your content into various web templates. Using that, there's really kind of no limit to how big of a page you could get, because you can kind of use that technique, nest them, and kind of get an unlimited number of characters within the web page. So that is something we've had to do a few times in the past where clients have a long, for whatever reason, they have a really long page. It doesn't fit in the page content, so we break it up into web templates. The other thing to know is that there are built-in web templates. So there are web templates that exist that you won't see in the web templates list in Dataverse. They actually are stored right in the site code. So they're not editable, but for the most part, you can see the source code, and I'll show you that in a second. But let's look at the documentation, because Microsoft does document this. So here, Microsoft does have the list of built-in web templates. So you can see, like, we've got add, blogs, breadcrumbs, child link list group, all of these different page templates. And then they kind of give you an example of like how you can use them. Now, I said there is a link to the definition of these. So let's look at, say, add, for example, add.liquid. Now we'll see kind of, here's the implementation of add.liquid. Now this is coming from the XRM Portals Community Edition. Now, if you don't know what the XRM Portals Community Edition is, many years ago, I want to say it was like 2017 or 2018, Microsoft actually took the source code for what was then known as Dynamics 365 Portals, now known as Power Pages. They took the source code and released it as an open source version. The idea is that it gave people who were on premise the ability. It was kind of one of the steps in order to upgrade to online. Um, but they basically took the source code for Power Pages and said, "Hey, anyone can download it." This Extra Portals Community Edition is that code that Adoxio, which was one of the companies that spun out of ADX Studio, um, Adoxio took this code and put it up into GitHub. So this code is basically the code that came from Microsoft, um, and that is where the liquid for those built-in one exists. Now the caveat here is that this is the code from, you can see, 7 years ago. So there's no guarantee that Microsoft hasn't changed some of the liquid, like some of how these works. Um, I'm not aware that any of these liquid things have changed. But you always have to, when you're looking at it, if something's not making sense, you have to keep that in the back of your mind that this was what those things looked like 7 years ago. There's a very good chance that most of these haven't changed. So it is useful to know about them, but you have to remember is that there could be changes in there. So if something isn't quite lining up right, possibly Microsoft has made some changes into some of these liquid statements, so that you can't necessarily use all of these. But I think for the most part, they're probably pretty accurate. So again, this is just the list. Here's the list of them, and then here is the folder in the ADX Studio web project where those liquid web templates have been defined. All right. So that's kind of what I want to cover today. Again, web templates, if you're building Power Pages, you're most likely going to run into them. You're going to use them for your header and footer for sure. You're going to use them for a bunch of page templates. If you're building out something a little bit more sophisticated, use Power Web Templates to create reusable components. If you're trying to build something for kind of low code, no code people use that new component web templates as component functionality so that they can use some of these kind of fancier things and just kind of drop them into place using the Design Studio. So lots of reasons to learn to love web templates. Okay, so next call. So next call we got scheduled for January 16th, 2025. I can't believe it's already going to be 2025. Same time, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Pacific time. So that is when we are scheduled to meet next. Like I said, we always kind of take the December off to give people some freedom around the holidays, myself included. Again, just want to say thank you to Jason and the MS Dynamics World team for a great 5 years. And I'll leave it open here to see if anyone has any questions, whether it's about web templates or any other topics related to Power Pages or Power Platform. We'll give you guys about 30 seconds here, and if there are no questions, we'll wrap it up. All right, well, I'll count fast. Maybe that wasn't quite 30 seconds, but I don't see anything in the questions. So, Jason, I think we can wrap it up here.
All right, sounds good, Nick. Thanks to everyone in the audience for joining us today, and we'll see you in the new year. I think that's it. Have a great day, everybody.
All right, thanks all.